So, going to continue my series on Noam Chomsky's book called Notes on Anarchism, which is a compilation of his writing on anarchism. And he obviously is an anarcho-syndicalist, which is a specific type of anarchist. And these include people like Bakunin and Kropotkin, who were disillusioned Russian socialists who saw the downfalls of communism, and so they had already moved to socialism, but they saw the flaws of those. So then they developed uh, apathy towards, not apathy, and animosity towards both corporations and government, which is why they're anarchists. They're not totally pro corporation, but anti government, like so called anarcho capitalists like Dave Smith, who actually is full mega, although he's actually uh, rejecting some of the fucking imperialistic pro-war shit that Trump's doing, but so good for him. But anyway, of course, Chomsky, for those who don't know, famous linguist, his theory is that we have a universal grammar, like evolutionally embedded into our brains, which helps us understand language, which is an interesting theory, but I don't think it's necessarily correct, although who am I to say? Anyway, Notes on Anarchism. It's like I said, it's a collection of his essays, and he's about to quote the anarchist historian Rudolf Rocker, and basically he's analyzing what he's saying and giving a really epic argument for anarchism, which doesn't entirely convince me because there are always flaws with arguments, but I find it phenomenally convincing, and he makes a very good case for anarchism. So let's get into the quote. All right. A French writer sympathetic to anarchism wrote in the 1890s that anarchism has a broad back. Like paper, it endures anything, including, he noted, those whose acts are such that a mortal enemy of anarchism could not have done better. There have been many styles of thought and action that have been referred to as anarchist. It would be hopeless to try to encompass all of these conflicting tendencies in some general theory or ideology. And even if we proceed to extract from the history of libertarian thought a living, evolving tradition, it remains difficult to formulate its doctrines as a specific and determinate theory of society and social change. The anarchist historian Rudolf Rocker, who presents a systematic conception of the development of anarchist thought towards anarcho-syndicalism, along puts the matter well when he writes that anarchism is not a fixed, self-enclosed social system, but rather a definite trend in the historic development of mankind, which, in contrast with the intellectual guardianship of all clerical and governmental institutions, strives for the free, unhindered unfolding of all the individual and social forces in life, which sounds kind of like vaguely flowery politician language, like a platitude, but I can see where he's going. Even freedom is only a relative, not an absolute concept, which I agree with, since it tends constantly to become broader and to affect wider circles in more manifold ways. For the anarchist, freedom is not an abstract philosophical concept, but the vital concrete possibility for every human being to bring to full development all the powers, capacities, and talents which nature has endowed him, and turn them to social account. The less this natural development of man is influenced by ecclesiastical or political guardianship, the more efficient and harmonious will human personality become, the more will it become the measure of the intellectual culture of the society in which it has grown. That's a very articulate and eloquent and convincing argument, I'd say. As a socialist, Chomsky comments, Rocker would take for granted that the serious, final, complete liberation of the workers, which sounds like a lefty thing, right? So, like I said, many of the original anarchists, like Bakunin, Kropotkin, Emmett Goldman, etc., they were kind of like socialists. They were disillusioned socialists who became anarchists. So that's why they talk about like the working class and left wing, like nearly Marxist terms like that. So anyway, As a socialist, Rocker would take for granted that the serious, final, complete liberation of the workers is possible only upon one condition, that of the appropriation of capital, that is, of raw material and all the tools of labor, including land, by the whole body of the workers. As an anarcho-syndicalist, he insists further that the workers' organizations create not only the ideas, but also the facts of the future itself. In the pre-revolutionary period, that they embody in themselves the structure of the future society, and he looks forward to a social revolution that will dismantle the state apparatus as well as expropriate the expropriators. What we put in place of government is industrial organization. Anarcho-syndicalists are convinced that a socialist economic order cannot be created by the decrees and statutes of a government. So it's an anarchist way of achieving like socialist goals, right? That's why it's anarcho-syndicalism. Socialist economic order cannot be created by the decrees and statutes of a government, but only by the solidaric collaboration of the workers with hand and brain in each special branch of production. That is, through the taking over of the management of all plants by the producers themselves. So, not exactly worker control of the means of production, but like the worker control of the government, overthrowing the government. It's like putting control of corporations in the hands of the people. Anyway, where was I? Oh, that is through the taking over the management of all plants by the producers themselves under such form that the separate groups, plants, and branches of industry are independent members of the general economic organism and systematically carry on production and the distribution of the products in the interest of the community on the basis of free mutual agreements. So this sounds good in theory, but how well would it work in practice? But anyway, they're basically saying branches are independent members of the general economic organism. So you can still have an economy, but it'll be more top down or federalist if you're talking about you know state approaches as opposed to federalist or federal approaches, I should say. Anyway, Chomsky continues. Rocker was writing at a moment when such idea. Oh, actually, he's talking about the Spanish Revolution, which we don't need to get in there, but and yeah, that's like I said, very eloquent, articulate, and persuasive argument for anarchism that in which Noam Chomsky is quoting the anarchist historian Rudolf Rocker, and yeah, this is why part of why I've been talking about anarchism, specifically anarcho-syndicalism, because there are different types of anarchism, and this type of anarchism is very interesting to me. I wouldn't say I'm an anarchist, but this idea of political ideology, I should say, has many interesting aspects, although it wouldn't necessarily work in practice. All right, so if you're Noam Chomsky, this is how we achieve anarcho-syndicalism. Anarchy!